What's up, everybody? Today I want to talk to you about the sustain technique and some concepts that kind of surround it. So the sustain technique is really just a fancy way to say how long we're holding on to our notes, right? The idea is that it's meant to mimic something like a piano's sustain pedal, or like a sustain function on a digital keyboard or something like that. But because the stick is pressed strings, as soon as you take your fingers off of the strings, your notes stop. So we have to find a way to simulate this with our hands. And simply put, sustain technique is at its core essentially being very deliberate and particular about where you choose to end your notes, as deliberate and particular about the ending of the notes as you would be about the beginning of them. We also have to think of the removal of the pressure of our hands and the stopping of a note in the same with the same sense of caution and intent as we would in placing a note rhythmically, or choosing a note over during a solo or in a melody. So my intent here, since that's pretty much the end-all be-all of what sustain is, what I just said, is to give a few examples and kind of break down the difference between with sustain and without it, and how I'm thinking about putting these parts together, and how I'm applying the technique, or really the concept, because holding a note is less a technique, in my opinion, than it is just a thing to keep track of, a concept, right? So we'll start with this lick, this half-crossed lick, off of the first Geff album from the song Yakto. So here I'm playing half-crossed, and I'm playing these big, thick chords that you might find, played on a guitar or something like that. I'm really going for the finger-picked guitar sound, or like a chordally played guitar sound. And along with that, I'm going for the kind of blending of all of the notes, and I'm using the sustain technique to achieve that. And I'm essentially just trying to hold on to every note that I play for as long as I can, right? If I play it without sustain, it's going to sound something like this. That's actually harder for me to do than just playing it with the sustain, right? And it's a huge difference in the tone, or rather the tonal quality of the part. The sustain technique, just trying to hold down every note for as long as I can, thickens the part so much. Again, listen to the first bar. Right? This note you can hear ringing through the entire time. Holding this note up here gives that slide of the lower note that a totally different quality than if I did this. That's what it becomes without sustain. And with it, it's got this it's just got this quality, this thickness, and this I guess elegance that you wouldn't quite get without it. In my arrangement of Janapati No. 1 by Eric Satie, I use the sustain technique to fill out the chords while the melody, which sits within the range of the chords, is able to stand separately. And by that I mean I'm using the sustain, the chords kind of go back and forth like this. Oops. And then the melody underneath that is happening like this. Right? And so what I have to do is I have to find a way to make these chords, if I play it without sustain, it's going to sound like this. And so instead, I try and, if it's not a melody voice, I try and hold it out for as long as I can, right? The melody is, moving in steady quarter notes in a bar of 3/4. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. And the chords, you've got this bass note for the chord that's happening on 1, and then the rest of the chord happens on 2, and then holds out for the rest of the bar. Without it, it would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Which I guess could be cool if I had like some hip-hop drums underneath or something like that. But if you want to play the song, you're going to need to use the sustain technique. Big difference, right? My study on sustain actually focuses on this technique, in a very significant way. The whole study is based around sustain technique and range crossing, which is to say that I'm using both sides, similar ranges in both sides of the stick, to kind of overlap with each other and make these big extended chords, and I'm using the sustain technique to then really blend all of the chords together, and it gives it a very, piano meets harp meets classical guitar kind of sound. And the fun part of this is that because of the range crossing, a lot of these notes are like a major or minor second away from each other. They're very close. And so when you do the sustain technique there, you get this rub that you wouldn't get. It's like when you stack seconds on top of each other. I don't know, I love that sound. Stuff like that. You just don't get that sound without it. It sounds like scales. Right? If I were to play that without the sustain technique, it would sound something like this. Honestly, I'm so used to playing it with sustain, and I'm so used to that sound that it's legitimately difficult to play it without that now. And all I'm doing is holding down the notes for as long as I can. When I replay this note with my pointer finger in my left hand here, I'm still holding down the middle finger. And when I'm, playing those three notes in that part of the chord there, I'm just holding down the other two fingers. And I might lift off my whole hand when I get to the next bar, or at least my whole whole left hand or my whole right hand, but there's always something underneath that's sustaining. And I don't stop doing that until I change chords, much like when you lift off your foot off of the sustain pedal of a piano. The next two examples are from Geff's new album Apophenia, and both of them make use of, just like the on sustain study, both of them make use of range crossing and the sustain technique to give a very, finger-picked guitar sound, and again, a very thickened tonal palette that you wouldn't get if it were just unsustained single notes. It would be these, I guess, pretty cool arpeggio lines, right? But it's the holding the notes down that really brings that from just another line that I'm playing to something, really special and not necessarily special, but different, right? It almost works simultaneously as a line and a pad, right? So this is the B section from Morning Star. And this part incorporates a bunch of different concepts, right? This part, I'm going from uncrossed with sustain to like a single line note that played in half crossed. Now I'm in crossed, using some really ugly chords. But if I were to try and play this without sustain, big difference, right? And yeah, I'm just trying to use that to fill out the sound space here. Underneath, Tyler is playing a bass line, and then when it comes back, he puts a melody on top of it while Josh plays a groove. And the whole thing winds up very thick and kind of jazzy, and it wouldn't be the same if I weren't sustaining it. Final example, similar concept, is from Macroaggressions. We play with this this chord progression, D major 7, 9, to a B major 7, or B major 9, to a G sharp 11, G major 7 sharp 11, right? And that comes back a couple of times throughout the song. One of the variations is me doing a similar uncrossed, sustained arpeggio thing, doing range mixing again. And I want to make a point of saying that I think range mixing and sustain are like two peas in a pod, right? This is what really lets the stick kind of shine in a way that other instruments, except maybe the piano, cannot do very naturally. Because when you range mix, you can get these really close interval arpeggios, and then when you add the sustain to it, those notes are overlapping on each other in a way that is very hard to do on guitar. The bass is very difficult, obviously, because the thickness of the sound of bass and the limited number of strings doesn't let you do that. Maybe you could do that on harp. You certainly couldn't do that on a wind instrument, because that's a monophonic instrument. And the only thing that I can think of that can really do this is piano. Where you're kind of playing like this, or playing with one hand holding the sustain pedal down. So getting back to it, the arpeggio shapes that I'm playing, it's 2 notes on the bass side and 3 notes on the treble side. those are the chord shapes that I'm playing, and then I arpeggiate them out. Oops. And it's all in 5. It's straight eighth notes. And I think that final chord that I'm holding out is a perfect example of like the things that sustain technique or the sustain concept can do for you. Listen to the thickness of that versus something like this. Just the loss of that bass note too, that really low note there, I mean it just makes a huge difference. It totally changes the tonal quality of the entire part to me. And it's a very subtle difference, right? It's not something like I'm going from major to minor, you know, and I'm going from like super bright to super dark, but there's a lushness that isn't there without the sustain technique. So I know this one was kind of quick, and it's a lot more conceptual than it is like, oh, this is how you do it, and this is the physical technique. But really all we're doing for sustain is we're just trying to hold our notes out for as long as we possibly can. And that's inside chords as well. So, you know, rather than doing something like this, right, if I were to sustain like a simple G chord, or, you know, even with one hand, like that, rather than something like this. I'm continuing to hold down, at the very least, I'm continuing to hold down that root note of the G there. It's a very subtle thing, but I think understanding that subtlety will bring your expressive ability on this instrument to the next level. So, I hope that helps. Try these out. I've got the tabs for everything I played today available to you on my Patreon page. And yeah, cool. Keep exploring, and good luck.